All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the bill hearings for February 15th. I'm Vice Chair Dana Stein. I'm sitting in for our chairman, Kumar Barbe, who's got a bill hearing in Ways and Means and will be back shortly. So the hearing order for this afternoon's bills will be starting with HB 551, and then we'll go to HB 396, HB 397, HB 400, HB 401, HB 537, HB 553, HB 608, HB 615, and last one will be HB 616. So with that, I'd like to ask Delegate Wells to present on her House Bill 551.
Great, thank you. Vice Chair Stein and fellow members of the Environment Transportation Committee. For the record, my name is Delegate Melissa Wells, and I'm here to testify on HB 551, which would prohibit certain increases on rent for qualifying tenants in rental units in order to maintain affordable housing opportunities in Maryland. This committee is very familiar, and those that are watching, with the fact that Maryland is continuing to struggle to keep up with the demand for affordable housing. And although we have made some progress in recent years, Maryland still lacks around 85,000 rental units for affordable rental units for lower income families and our aging in place elders. And I think it's really important that we really look at some opportunities for us to act now and to be able to provide and increase the additional provision of affordable housing in upcoming years. So this is why I have proposed this bill, HB 551. It prohibits landlords from increasing annual rent by more than 2% for properties built before 1990 and for tenants who make 50% or less of the area median income. This bill would also allow an additional 4% increase in rent if there is a determination from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development that the unit is underpriced because of recent significant development. So they would continue to use the HUD fair market rate, which that is done annually. So we know that rent continues to increase while wages remain stagnant, and this legislation will help stop landlords from increasing rent among those most vulnerable. I recognize many renters in the state have the means to pay some of the recent increase in rents, but this bill is not for those renters. This bill is taking an equity-based approach to recent stabilization that allows low-income tenants to continue to afford those units without impacting other aspects of the rental market. Without this bill, we will continue to dig ourselves deeper and make it nearly impossible to fight the affordable housing crisis we are in now. If developers refuse to build more affordable housing, we must put effort into maintaining the low-cost housing that we have now. And we know that everyone deserves to have safe, affordable housing. So I believe that we should take action before it's too late. I did want to just add that there's a couple of things that were raised in the opposition. I think there's a great point around some of the more minor emergencies, such as when we have inclement weather. And I'm definitely, that's a great point. And I will be working with folks in subcommittee to address that. We also have an amendment as well, which was raised around if there is renovation, especially in areas that have older housing stock, like Baltimore area. And so the amendment we have is that this would not apply if there's been an alteration of $15,000 or more. So I just wanted to share that with folks. But with that, I am hoping for a favorable testimony, and I look forward to questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Delegate. We'll take the witnesses who are supportive next, and then we'll have questions for the bill sponsor and for advocates in support of, and then we'll go to the witnesses who are unfavorable. So with that, I'd like to ask Kelly Donahoe to present.
Thank you, Chairman, Vice Chairman, and the members of the committee. My name is Kelly Mullen Donahoe, and I'm a staff attorney with Maryland Legal Aid in the Upper Eastern Shore office. And I'm here to testify in support of the House Bill 551. Maryland Legal Aid is a nonprofit law firm that provides free legal services for Maryland's low-income and vulnerable residents. And securing stable, affordable housing for our clients is one of the biggest services that we provide. However, Maryland does have an affordable housing shortage of, as you heard, of at least 85,000 units for those who are considered extremely or very low income, meaning that they earn less than 50% of the area median income. To address this shortage, this bill seeks to limit the amount landlords can increase rents against low-income residents in certain types of property units in order to preserve the affordable housing we currently have, while also allowing landlords to keep up with fair market rent. Notably, this bill will only apply to buildings constructed before 1990. That's not hamper new construction. It doesn't apply to units where the rent is already 50% above fair market rent. It only applies to units with tenants who are considered extremely or very low income, and it doesn't apply if the rent reaches $2,250 per month. So this bill is more targeted to the older, presently established affordable housing in an attempt to keep it affordable for low-income households. In our experience, when a new owner takes over a property or when affordable property housing programs expire, our clients are often subjected to major rent increases, essentially overnight, and that they can't afford, and which usually occurs in evictions or homelessness. And many of these low-income renters are seniors or people with disabilities who live on a fixed income. So a sudden increase of $200 a month in rent is a significant burden and unsustainable for long-term affordable housing. The objective of this bill is to still allow landlords to increase rent, but having that increase occur at a more gradual and manageable pace would make a world of difference in keeping our current affordable housing affordable for the future and prevent immediate homelessness and displacement of low-income and vulnerable residents. For these reasons, American Legal Aid urges a favorable report on House Bill 551. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next is Zephyr Shah.
Great. Thank you, Vice Chair Stein, members of the committee. My name is Zephyr Shah. I'm an attorney at the Human Right to Housing Project at the Public Justice Center. We provide legal assistance and representation to hundreds of tenants across the state each year. And rent increases that make a once affordable home unaffordable instantly are a constant complaint that we receive when we talk to tenants. I received one such complaint just within the last week from a Baltimore City renter who's a federal employee pensioner who lives on a very fixed income. And this is what she told me when I told her, I'm sorry, but there's nothing against the law when you have a 20% increase in rent as she faces. She said, this is not about eviction. It's about displacement, moving from your place because you can't afford it anymore. It's traumatic. Being forced out of your home because of price gouging, because you can't make the monthly rent and utilities anymore. It's trauma. It's hardship. Our pensions aren't going up 20%. Our wages aren't going up 20%. The only thing going up 20% is the roof on our heads. And she said that the fact that there's no limit under law to what her landlord is doing is frightening to her. And I share that because you're going to hear a lot about the economists, what they have to say about rent control, about CPI and inflation and what have you. But at the end of the day, this bill is about keeping people in their communities so that they're not having to choose between leaving or going broke. It's as simple as that. The clients that we have at Public Justice Center had a lifeline when localities passed emergency rent increase caps during the pandemic, but those are long gone for the most part. And rent has increased year over year as of January, almost 10%.
Zephyr, if you could begin to wind up your testimony, the committee would appreciate that.
That's exactly where I was going to end up, Mr. Chair. We support HB 551. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to the Vice Chair for getting us started off. Next, we'll hear from Wade Brown. Wade, welcome to the Environment and Transportation Committee. You have 2 minutes. Wade, is I'm assuming Mr. Brown with us? Seeing not, Dana, did you say that we do questions for all the advocates, or did you say we? Okay, well, in that case, we'll entertain questions right now, and we're going to start with Delegate Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick question for the bills, the delegate, the bill sponsor. Did you figure anything in here for additional cost on real estate taxes? And because in some locations you see property values increasing substantially, and when that happens, the additional expense of real estate taxes kick in, and it can be, it can be more than 2%. It could be 4 or 5, up to 10%. Actually, it's commercial property. It could go up whatever the assessment goes up. So my question is, did you take that into consideration in this bill at all?
Thank you, Delegate. So this bill, no, we did not. I know that there's some legislation that folks are looking at this year, at least I know in the Baltimore region, that will try to provide some offset some of those costs, but this bill did not specifically speak to that.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, next question goes to Delegate Wyville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to understand some of the numbers in the legislation. So I know we're experiencing highest periods of inflation, I think, in the last 40 to 50 years. So I think they're anywhere from 8 to 10%. I'm just kind of curious as to how 2% was derived.
So the 2% was derived as that's kind of the general consensus of what it can be annually. And so because that's typically kind of the interval utilized, we figured we would start there and just try to help provide some assurance on a yearly basis. That way folks don't have to perhaps get slammed with anything that's well above that 2%.
So there's really, is it an objective?
It's the average. It's roughly the average inflation.
The average what? I'm not following.
For inflation for rent.
Historically.
Correct. Sorry, you broke up.
Historically?
Historically, correct.
Okay, and then, so if it's below market, you're allowing it at 4%. If it's a below market rental.
If you are a person that's at the 50%, and it's deemed it's below market, then it can be at the additional 4%.
And who sets market?
The market rate is set by HUD.
For any given area?
Correct. Yep.
All right. And then where did 1990 come from? Pre-1990 properties?
We were really just trying to narrow it because previously it was a much broader. And so we were looking at some of the older housing stock and looking at, how do we limit it in a way that would not have an impact on future development. And so that's how we got to the 1990 number.
So if I have a rental that was built in 1991, this wouldn't apply to me.
Correct.
All right. And you talked about affordable housing shortages. So if I'm a supplier of housing, I'm just trying to grapple with, would I be more inclined to go into the market to provide rental, or less inclined if I was restricted to a 2% annual increase at times when inflation is 8 to 10%?
It wouldn't. This is for housing stock that's older, that's 1990 and older. So if you're newly in the market, also we have an amendment that if you are going to be putting over $15,000 or more in development costs, like rehab renovation costs, that would be excluded from this.
But if I buy an existing property that was built prior to 1990, I'm subject to the limitations, correct?
If it falls within all those restrictions, yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next question goes to Delegate Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask the sponsor, just go kind of down that same road, because I apologize, I haven't had a chance to look at the bill closely. This exemption for the investments, if you buy an older property, for example, and there's a cost to making it coming up to modern standards, to maybe putting in a dishwasher or fixing or maybe putting in single meters or some other thing that a little more than just painting it, especially if it's been and one of the people when people buy these small properties for investment that are old, one of the selling points is that there are already tenants. So I would think they wouldn't want to get rid of the tenants, but they also have to be able to recoup their costs. So is that what your amendment is getting at, to try to help them to bring things up to more up to date on what's
Absolutely.
the amenities that people expect nowadays?
Absolutely. That's what this amendment is getting at. And we're really starting small with this bill, right? I understand this is very narrowly focused, but we understand that there are areas to what your question is getting to, Delegate Healy, where there is a need for there to be upgrade. Sometimes you absolutely have to upgrade it because it's just such outdated technology. The efficiency is practically non-existent at this point. So we really are trying to find a way to not discourage that from happening. So that's what the amendment that we have would do.
Okay, and is there an exemption for like there isn't a lot of things for very small properties? You have 4 or 5 units in the building. If you live in one of the units yourself, is that different?
So we haven't spoken about that exemption. I'd be happy to talk more about that in subcommittee.
Okay, thank you.
Definitely, thank you.
Next question goes to Delegate Ampry.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate Wells, for bringing this bill forward. I think we are in alliance on, we got to figure out ways to make housing and rent more affordable throughout the state. I'm always worried about making sure that we're creating the best pathways to make sure no one's being super harmed by bills like this. So my question kind of goes along with Delegate Clark's question. I know that you said there's not an exception currently for increase in property taxes or real estate taxes, and we know we're going to see a nice increase after this little surge we've had. But my question is more so thinking about those homes or apartments that have, where the utilities are included. If there's an increase or change in the utility costs, and they then have to incorporate that into, is there a pathway to deal with that in the current bill? And forgive me if I missed this earlier, but is there any conversation that you've talked about or thought about in making sure that's addressed?
So I'm only smiling just because that really gets us into another conversation this committee has had about definition of rent.
Right.
And so this does not speak to that. But this is just looking at rent itself, right? So this is not looking at the utility costs or anything like that. But that's a really good question. And I don't know if there's more there that we should be considering. I'd be happy to think through some of that. Absolutely.
Got it. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? I've got a question that's a little related to this, and maybe it's more directed toward the advocates. I'm drafting a bill that would really do a proper inventory of how much housing we have throughout the state of Maryland. Zuffer, do you or any of your allies have any data about the number and the type of housing that exists in the city of Baltimore? Number of apartment units, whether they've increased or decreased over the last several years. Does anybody who you know have that kind of information?
To answer that question, Mr. Chair, I know that my fellow advocates don't have that type of data for an inventory. I think that Department of Housing and Community Development for the city has figures, but for instance, when we've asked the city housing agency, for instance, like what percentage of all available rental housing is licensed, they don't have that number. So there are, I think, probably specific data points that a local agency doesn't have because they haven't had a specific reason to collect that information.
Well, maybe
and
we're
it
going to
changes
give,
from time to time, so I'm sure it's actually
Well,
challenging.
maybe we're going to give them a reason to do that. Let's see.
Yeah.
Any further, but Delegate Holmes had his hand up there for a second, and then it went down again. What's going on, Marvin?
Yeah, in reference to the city of Baltimore, the city, if you have a rental unit, you have to have a rental license. Right? So if you have to have a rental license, then they would know the amount of units that are for rent.
You
So
would
that
think, yeah.
addresses part of your issue there, because they have to keep track of that, because they have to have inspections, et cetera. Mr. Chair.
I see Zuffer smiling. He may be holding back some information that he should be telling us. Go spit it out, Zuffer. Where is he?
I'm sorry. So they would know the number of landlords who operate with a license, but not the number that operate without the license. So that's the question that they cannot answer. So they don't really, to my knowledge, and I hope that in the course of your other bill, Mr. Chair, that agencies can answer that question of what they know.
Good to know. Delegate Jalisi has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I know, the rental licenses do not have the amount of rent that is being charged. And the second thing, which is specific to Baltimore City, is that they are so far behind in issuing rental licenses that it's not even funny. I have several clients for my property management company who don't have rental licenses after applying for several months. And also my real estate attorney in Baltimore City who has properties is having the same problem. So the city agency responsible for issuing rental licenses is so far backed up that rental licenses are an issue. But most importantly, the rental licenses do not specify how much rent is being collected. And as far as the inspection is concerned, Baltimore City switched in 2020 from doing its own inspections of properties to letting private property owners do their own inspections and just submitting certificates of insurance. So rental licenses and the inspections are done by the property owner, unlike some other jurisdictions. And they don't have specification of what rent is being charged. I think that's the main issue right now. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I believe you need to unmute.
Okay, that would explain why nobody was responding to me when I was talking. Okay, let's go to Bill Castelli, who signed up in opposition to the bill. Bill, welcome back to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would just mention very quickly that some of that data that you were talking about is available at the Maryland Department of Planning. There's a website data dashboard that they have. You can actually look at it by county. It's not everything you're looking for, but it'll talk about just percentage of workforce housing, rental housing, other types of housing. So,
okay. Well, sorry for letting me get us all sidetracked here. Why don't your 2 minutes begin now and talk about this bill?
Sure. So Bill Castelli on behalf of the Maryland Realtors, and we do agree that there is an affordability issue. We just don't think this is the right solution. One of our biggest concerns is that most of our owners and property managers really represent kind of smaller single-family properties. Many of these owners and property managers are managing property where an owner who may only own 1 or 2 rental properties is already paying a mortgage on that property. So it's not like they're, having a huge profit margin in terms of the rents that they have on these different properties. And I think some of the questioning made reference to it. Unlike, for example, a homeowner like myself who lives in that home, I get the benefit of a homestead tax credit. Property taxes in the last year, 21, went up by over 20%. In the year before, it was over 9%. The year before that, it was over 3%, 5%. I mean, these taxes have going up well beyond the rate specified in the bill. And so when you're not protected against those increases in assessments, that mortgage amount that they're going to be paying is going to be increasing when that new assessment comes through. And so these are costs that the rental property owners have no control over, that they still have to pay when they're paying their mortgage, and probably not making a significant kind of profit on it, because many of them are collecting in rent enough to pay that mortgage so that they can build equity over time. So it's for a lot of those properties that we think a bill like this becomes very problematic. And we think, the real answer is increasing supply. We very much like the other bill that you were talking about in terms of creating some of that data so that we can start tracking it better. But we think supply is the real answer to addressing some of these affordability concerns. And for that reason, we would recommend an unfavorable report.
Okay, next, Tommy Thompson with MMHA. Tommy, welcome back to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and honorable members of the committee. Thomas Thompson on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association. I do actually want to thank the sponsor for bringing this issue forward for discussion. I know her, and she's very constituent focused. And so I know she introduced us with those constituents in mind. The problem for us is that when we lodge our opposition with this bill, we know that the realities of rent control, unfortunately, never intersect with those good intentions. The effects of rent control, they've been studied at length, and the general consensus about rent control is that it always leads to unfavorable outcomes. And I'm going to try to lay them out quickly in this 2 minutes. Landlords first experience a reduction in their net operating income. And so your net operating income is the barometer of how your business is doing. It tells you whether you can first pay yourself either now or in the long run, if this is a long-term investment. It tells you whether you can make your mortgage payments or do you need supplemental funds to do that. It tells you whether you can save for big expenses, new roofs, HVAC systems, and upgrades to the property. And then it tells you also whether you need to make adjustments to either curtail your expenses or increase your revenue. And unfortunately, in this case, the revenue is the rent. But when you have a declining net operating income that this bill would create, you would have less money for maintenance, and then the buildings would essentially deteriorate. They'll eventually lead to lower appraised values over time. We see this discussion about reserve studies in this committee. And so lower appraised values lead to impacts on lending. It leads to underwriting impacts as well. And so then you're stuck with higher interest rates when you go look for maintenance funding or new construction funding. It also, when you have a deteriorating property, it's hard to keep your current residents and attract new residents. So again, your net operating income will either remain stagnant or essentially go down. Rent control also provides a disincentive if you're a developer. You're looking at the decreases in expected revenues when you see a rent control bill. And so if you're a developer, an owner, an investor, you're going to be a little more hesitant to venture into these development opportunities, including affordable housing. They are investments. I mean, we have to remember that. And so the decrease in expected rental revenues by limiting the rental rate increase.
Tommy, if you could start to wind it up, the committee would appreciate it.
And so with those cascading effects and the fact that it cascades onto the counties that gets the revenues from taxes, various forms of taxes, we are opposed to HB 551, and we'd love to speak with the sponsor and work with her more on this issue.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from Amy Mocht. Amy, you are with Regional Management, I think. Welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you. I'm the president of Regional Management. Regional Management manages affordable market rate housing. If you saw my screensaver before, it shows a picture of Northeast Baltimore. We have over 3,500 units in Northeast Baltimore and over the line in Northeast Baltimore County. These were built in the 60s and 70s when you could actually build affordable housing and charge rents that covered your cost of doing so. Unfortunately, that is not the situation now. This naturally occurring affordable housing is really what you have to work with for affordable housing that is not costing $250,000 per unit for the state to build and underwrite. The last 2 years, we haven't been able to raise the rent at all because of different COVID restrictions. And without rental assistance during this period where we have a 25% delinquency, we would not be able to maintain this housing. It is not sustainable. the tenants who we're targeting in this bill, which, which we want to help, they need more help than this bill gives. And this bill hurts the housing, but doesn't help the tenants enough. The tenants at 50% or less didn't qualify to rent regular, affordable market rate housing to begin with, if that was their income at that time. They would have had to have a subsidy of some kind in the Section 8 program. They would have had 30% of their rent at, set at their income limit. This limit won't increase their rent or decrease their rent. It'll actually just decrease the amount the federal government will pay towards the rent. So you're really decreasing your federal subsidy. Tenants who lost money during tenancy, the landlord doesn't know that they're at 50% or less. They don't know what their income is. So they need to apply for aid. But fortunately, in the last 18 months, we've had a lot of experience in the state about how to help tenants with assistance. It's been through a lot of federal dollars, and it's been overly generous in terms
Amy,
of
if you could start to wrap up.
The state should work with the people who have been providing rental assistance to do a real rental assistance program for tenants under this amount of income. They could do it by having—
Amy, if you could begin to wrap up.
Okay, one more thing. The tenant could pay 30% and the state could give a tax credit to the property owner for the different amount of the rent, so that it would be a way of subsidizing affordable housing that is this naturally affordable housing stock, and really help the tenants that we're speaking to.
Okay, next let's turn to Katherine Howard. Katherine, welcome back to the committee. You have 2 minutes. Kathy? Well, we'll go to Paula Munger then. Paula, are you out there?
I am.
Okay, you're up.
Thanks to the committee for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Paula Munger, the AVP of Research for the National Apartment Association. Through education, advocacy, and collaboration, NAA is a federation of 149 state and local affiliates, and we represent more than 10.5 million apartment homes worldwide. I have 25 years of experience in both real estate and economics research. There are a few areas of study that most economists and scholars agree on. Rent control is one of them, and I'm going to speak broadly on rent control and rent caps today. While they're well-meaning policies, their effects represent inefficient outcomes relative to allowing the market price to adjust to supply and demand. Under normal conditions, rising rent levels would be met with increased building in an area, and that in turn would curb long-term rent growth. However, rent control blunts the price mechanism, causing a misallocation of housing investment both within and across areas. It destabilizes the rental market by driving away investment, not only in new construction, but in investment in renovations as well, and that ultimately decreases affordability. Limiting rent growth also affects the long-term viability of performing these much-needed renovations on existing units because it changes the expected return on investment. Even routine maintenance and repairs can become financially unfeasible for some owners, and that poses risk to the housing stock. Additionally, a cap on rents is essentially a cap on rental income, which would directly result in lower property values, and that in turn decreases property tax revenue. Development, rehab, and maintenance generates significant economic benefits in terms of job creation, wage growth, and overall economic value to the regional and state economies. Rent control policies eradicate these benefits because these activities are significantly reduced or even eliminated. Research and real-world experience show that rent control policies don't work. They hurt renters, they hurt housing providers, and the broader community. Thank you for the time and consideration.
Thank you. Next, let's turn to Erin Bradley. Erin, welcome back to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Barva and members of the committee. As Chair Barva said, I'm Erin Bradley representing AOPA. Economists have several arguments against rent control, and I've outlined the economic impacts of Montgomery County's rent control in my written testimony. So today I'll just point out 2 ways this bill impacts rent. The bill disincentivizes housing providers from operating in the naturally occurring affordable space, as a 2% increase only applies to Class B and C properties, those built before 1990 and with rent below $2,200. A mandated 2% increase does not track with increased operating expenses to manage apartment communities, for example, increased utility costs, which landlords pay on behalf of residents in many of these properties. But it particularly impacts communities of this age, which require the most maintenance, perhaps not large renovations of $15,000 a project, but a dozen $5,000 projects. This is likely one reason that economists in Montgomery County Office of Legislative Oversight note that rent control laws increase the number of condominium conversions and may reduce the number of new units constructed. The way this bill attempts to means test a resident's eligibility for rent control is also problematic. As Amy referenced, there is no way of verifying which residents meet the threshold. Housing providers collect information about a prospective tenant's income at the time the resident applies for the unit. However, there's no way of knowing if the resident has experienced significant financial gain or setback. Thus, there is no way of knowing who makes less than or equal to 50% AMI on any property at any given time, unless the bill also intends to mandate ongoing income verification, which residents would rightly find invasive and housing providers are pretty uncomfortable conducting. AOBA members offer some of the most affordable housing options in the state. We know that to meet the state's affordable housing needs, it will require both preservation and production of affordable housing. But this bill unintentionally discourages the preservation of high quality, naturally occurring affordable housing. And as such, we respectfully request an unfavorable report on HB 551.
Okay, is Kathy Howard back in the room? Not in? Okay, in that case, we will proceed to questions. First question goes to Delegate Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate Wells, for bringing this bill, and thank you all for testifying. I just want to make sure I understand and hear the clarity in all of the opposition testimony is that there is an issue. You don't believe this is the way to solve the issue. And for a couple of you said stabilization means that we need to increase the amount of units. And I wasn't clear about whether they're affordable units or just housing altogether. And two, I believe someone else said this only works at the percentages that the sponsor has listed. If, in other words, the individuals who would meet this criteria are people you're saying that would already need subsidies or rental assistance, so on and so forth. So if someone can just help clear that up for me, I'd greatly appreciate it, if I made any sense.
Go ahead, Amy.
In terms of the tenants below 50% in Baltimore City, they would only be able to really qualify for a unit that would rent under $600 a unit, which for a family of four, which I think that number goes for, is just not feasible. So they should be having, if they're renting, they're having some other kind of assistance, which means that their amount of rent is already limited. And it would be the subsidy that is what you're capping potentially on the, a federal subsidy, which no reason for Maryland to cap the federal subsidy that's coming into them. The people who are at, who become just, less income rich during their tenancy need to apply for some sort of an aid. And so that kind of aid is a gap that Maryland really has. We've learned from the last 18 months that tenants will apply for aid if it's out there, that there are ways to vet it. Every county in the state has got a group of people now who have been vetting people for an 80% or less median income because of the COVID money. So, there are mechanisms to do this, and there are ways either for the state to step up with more money, which the governor, I think, has already allocated some right now. But in an ongoing way, my proposal was to say, why don't you get a property tax credit against the amount of aid, difference between the tenant's income that they should spend, that they can spend for rent, and the market rent for that unit, as a way of subsidizing these very low income tenants.
Well, so I'm gonna just push back a little bit and ask the question about, in some cases there could be an acceptance. Is it so that there are lots of landlords who otherwise, I would say illegally and discriminatory, don't accept the assistance, and therefore people tend to have a hard time finding housing? And so in some cases, yes, I think in a place like Baltimore City where like public housing lists have been long lists and waiting lists for decades. But wouldn't you say that the other issue to your point about subsidies is that some landlords don't accept it or won't accept it?
Last year you made a law that said everybody has to. So you kind of cleaned that potential up of not accepting. There were reasons and of the programs and everything else, but at this point, one must accept that aid. Of course, that right now, I mean, it's sort of public policy that
I'm
you
sorry,
don't-
Miss, I don't mean just the aid in that, for instance, if, you know, I'm a firm believer and a supporter of Section 8, for instance, right? Because it helps tenants pay market rate housing. And there are landlords who will say we don't, you know, in very different ways, in ways that I think keeps them safe sometimes, so that they don't accept that. So to your point about individuals who need more help, I think those sometimes are the people who have them and therefore sometimes can't get it because landlords don't accept.
Well, I think at this point, I mean, there's been a big change in the last 2 years, both in, you know, everyone working together to try and keep tenants in place. I think we have to look at it for where we are today. And what there really is that this extra money that's come from the federal government's been very important. And the idea is, how are we going to go forward to transition to a new time when that's not going to come, and have the states pick up to figure out how to help the tenants now?
Thank you. And then can I have my other question answered about the increase of units? So there was I think it was Mr. Caselli. And my notes stated that the answer was essentially that we needed more units. And I don't know if that means we need more affordable housing units, or is it just that it's kind of a supply and demand? As there was more supply, there'll be less, you know, it would drive down potentially prices of rent. I just don't understand the.
So, yeah, thank you, Delegate Boyce. And our position would be an increase of affordable units would certainly help, but also an increase of all units. I mean, if you think about the market, you know, supply and demand, you know, restricted supplies increase, you know, and you have greater demand, that, and what effect that has on prices. And what you end up happening is when supply is down, you've got people who potentially could afford, you know, even more expensive apartments given their income, now actually competing with people who are poorer than them for affordable units, because those are the only units that are available. So it then puts, you know, those tenants in a tougher position vis-a-vis the other tenants that they're applying for these units for. So I think overall supply needs to be increased. The housing needs assessment certainly indicated that we're, you know, 80,000 units behind. I think Delegate Wells was mentioning some of those statistics. So there is an issue here, an important issue that can be addressed. I think addressing it without having the market kind of consequences that folks were talking about, Ms. Mock kind of mentioned it, you know, rental assistance and tax credits and things like that don't seem to have the kinds of market distortions that a rent control bill does. But, you know, overall, you know, supply is a big component of this.
Thank you, Mr. Caselli. I'm anxious to hear more about at some point the chairman's bill, but I think to the point, there are other places doing this, and I'd be curious about how they're doing it as it relates to some of the opposition questions and how we essentially can, in my words, make everybody whole, because I think we can. Thanks so much.
Oh, okay. I thought you had been cut off there. Okay, Delegate Lehman is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a really fascinating discussion. I'm going to start off with a very brief editorial comment that I'm so taken aback by some of the opponents' testimony. I wrote down some of the phrases they were using, and it's astonishing and frankly, I think a little bit offensive to me personally, based on where I'm coming from. For example, Ms. Bradley talked about naturally occurring affordable housing or affordable housing space. What does that even mean? Naturally occurring affordable housing? To my knowledge, there is no such thing. What does that mean?
Can I? Yes. So to speak to that, naturally occurring affordable housing or market rate affordable housing is that housing that is not class A, does not cost the top of the market, but is accessible without assistance for people of a variety of means. So class B and class C properties, which are older and inherently lower in rent, are considered naturally occurring affordable. I know Ms. Munger can probably give you an economic perspective on what that means and how it varies.
I don't want the economic perspective. I want, what do you mean by naturally occurring? How is it? All of the affordable housing I know of comes about because of government intervention. I've never heard of naturally. So if that's an inside baseball term within the housing industry, that's one thing, but I've never heard of that before.
So naturally occurring affordable housing is housing that is older and the rents cost less than a certain amount. So it is housing that is by its very nature and in the market rents for less than other housing.
And is it fair to say, because in my experience in Prince George's County, Ms. Bradley, or any others on here, Mr. Castelli, you have a lot of experience in Prince George's. Is it not fair to say that a lot of that quote unquote naturally affordable housing is older and often not just older age-wise, but dilapidated and not the kind of housing any of us in this room would want to live in? Because I'm going to tell you, that's my experience in Prince George's. And I was on the county council for 8 years, lived my whole life in the county. That's what we're talking about in Prince George's.
So I understand, and I also represent properties in Prince George's County. I know Bill has experience with Prince George's County as well. No, it is not to say it's dilapidated. Professionally managed properties such that AOBA represents and MHA are not dilapidated. And if they were in fact dilapidated, they wouldn't have the requisite rental license that they need. And Prince George's County, professionally managed properties in Prince George's County have rental licenses. So no, you can't be a dilapidated property and also have a rental license.
Well, we'll have to discuss that another time, because I can name several properties that in fact fall into that category that have been written up in the Washington Post because the living conditions are that deplorable. We'll have that conversation offline. Somebody said, this is my next question. So what is the answer, Mr. Castelli, to the problem of the shortage of affordable housing? And please don't let the answer be that it's just a supply issue, because it clearly is so much more than that. What, in your view, if you're opposed to rent control or even rent stabilization, I assume you are, then what is the answer to the affordability crisis? And I believe it's a crisis.
So I would say that the answers, and I think some of the market rate answers that people spoke about today, included things like the tax credits that you see provided to housing providers for creating apartments that fit certain income limits. But I think also you've seen rental assistance programs. Rental assistance it's not a control of the rent. But I will, and I know you don't want to hear it, but I do think supply is an important component of it. Because at the end of the day, we know that there is a naturally occurring portion of our housing units that just disappears. These are properties that, as you indicated, are really no longer habitable. They fall off. So every year, you're not only just building to meet whatever the new demand is, you're also building to recover units that you just naturally use as those properties age and deteriorate. So, I mean, I do think supply is a big component of this.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, two more quick questions. And one is a suggestion for you, Chair Barve, if you're going to pursue this bill on housing stock. I think what it would be helpful to start with is understanding how many jurisdictions in Maryland even have affordable housing laws on the books. It might surprise some people on this committee to know that Prince George's County did away with its affordable housing law more than 20 years ago. We don't even have an affordable housing law in Prince George's, or what they now call inclusionary zoning.
Well, Delegate, I'd really prefer, and we should talk about that, but I prefer questions right now. I know I ran the risk of this happening when I made my philosophical question, so I can't blame you for pursuing it.
So I just wonder if the opponents of this bill know the answer to that. How many jurisdictions? When I say jurisdictions, I'm not talking about all the municipalities. I'm talking about the counties. Do any of you know how many have affordable housing laws on the books right now?
Well, we can certainly ask council to find out the answer to that.
Yeah, I would like to know that. And that's all for now. I want to thank Delegate Wells for bringing the bill. I do think it's important. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Okay, next question goes to Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, thank all of y'all for coming this afternoon. It's good to see you. So I agree with two of the things y'all said, and I disagree with one of them. So first, where we agree. First, it's a fact that we need more housing units, period. Second, it's a fact that numerous studies have found that strict rent control, so-called, first wave rent control, can depress property values for rent controlled and for nearby market rate buildings, can decrease affordability in the long term, decrease affordability in the long term, can spur condo conversion, and essentially can have all these unintended consequences that y'all laid out. We agree. That is what a huge raft of studies said for a long time. What we disagree on is that the academic research, the more recent one, is not at all uniform on rent regulation policies. What it basically says, it's a fact that what the studies now tend to say is that less restrictive rent regulation, so-called second or third wave rent control, sometimes called rent stabilization, is not associated with lower rates of new housing construction, not associated with overall lower property values, not associated with condo conversion, not associated with all these bad things. And just to name one study, in case y'all want to Google it real fast, there's a great 2015 paper called 40 Years of Rent Control, Re-Examining New Jersey's Moderate Local Policies After the Great Recession, with emphasis on the word moderate local policies. New Jersey, many of its municipalities are one of the examples of these the kind of like second wave rent control policies. So I'm not sure where this bill in its current form falls on this continuum of strict and bad rent control or relaxed and good rent control. But my question to the opponents is, have any of you read any of these recent studies that I'm talking about, including the one I cited, about the benefits and the lack of downsides to less restrictive rent regulation?
Yeah, Amy?
I haven't read that study, but I can tell you that as a company, we have always had an internal rent control. We believe that we're trying to keep tenants in place. Between different inflation times, we've had either a 3 or a 4% limit on existing tenants' rent increases, limited, of course, by the actual market of what new tenants are paying. Our existing tenants never pay more than what our new tenants pay. And actually, we keep that at 94% of what the new tenants pay. So I do believe that some kind of control over rents does promote a better market. But I think that the property manager actually has a better idea of what they can absorb and where that line falls. For instance, Baltimore City has had water increases of over 9% a year for the last 6 years. I mean, our water bill is about 10 to 12% of the rent. That I can't really keep absorbing that. So to have a 2% increase when for 2 years we haven't had any increases on existing tenants doesn't fall into moderate, in my opinion.
Totally. And I think we could all talk about whether 2% is the right number and whether that falls into this bucket of studies and that bucket of studies. But we agree, I assume we agree, that there are these more recent studies out there that say that if you set the number correctly and it's not too restrictive, then all of the harms that all the opponents laid out don't necessarily come to fruition.
I think that it really does depend on what the rate is and what the exceptions are for taxes, utilities, et cetera.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. As long as we agree that, I mean, there is a way to do this and a correct rate to set, then I think that we have opportunities all moving forward collectively together. But yeah, I appreciate it. That's all I got. I appreciate it, Mr. Chair.
I mean, when they talked about a 20% increase on an existing tenant, I agree that's not really very feasible for that to happen, but that really isn't what's happening, except in areas that are maybe experiencing, a real different market shift. And that's a different kind of bill in terms of the gentrification. And that 15%, $15,000 modification actually exempts those units probably from, the restriction of, things that are going on that changes the nature of the housing.
And Mr. Chair, if I may as well,
sure.
I will agree with you. The studies that you have cited, it is the rigidness of the policy that dictates how detrimental the impact of rent control will be. And so what's very interesting is we're creating a state policy, and yet we have a housing stock in each jurisdiction that is distinctly different and unique to those jurisdictions. And so I would say that the way this is framed is fairly rigid. And I think that's why you're seeing the concern that's being voiced. I think you have come up with creative ideas on looking down even to the zoning level with regards to what types of houses can be included in zoning. And I know that's out of the reach sometimes of the General Assembly, but you have brought that forward. Other people have said, hey, look at these commercial properties that are now vacant or are just not in use. Is there a way that we can ingrain affordable housing into that? Is there inclusionary zoning that can occur? I mean, I think there's a lot of really great ideas out there. It kind of gets lost in the noise of some of these bigger issues. But I do think that this committee is capable of addressing the shortage. And I do think that, as Amy said, yes, there's a certain level where we could all acknowledge that that's just not acceptable. But 2%, which is not even at the price of inflation, that is rigid at its best, because the numbers that we see at least show that housing in this state has tracked with inflation for the last 15 years at least. So that's not a consolation when you see inflation right now, but things will level out, and I think that number will hold fast. So
yeah.
Yes, I just want to acknowledge that what you are saying has some validity to it from my perspective.
Okay, I very much appreciate that. And I certainly agree with you that whether it's zoning or subsidies or whatever, this is a problem that's so deep and so acute, we've got to throw the whole kitchen sink at it. I just want to make sure that we're not foreclosing the idea of stabilization because of an errant belief that the studies are uniform on this. Anyway, I appreciate it. And I look forward to, continuing to work everyone and with the bill sponsor and with the chairman on the issue.
Okay, good conversation. Delegate Ruth is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate Wells, for bringing this bill. And I really appreciate how carefully and thoughtfully you've worked through this, trying to limit it and working with advocates trying to find the best solutions. My question is for Ms. Macht, and I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name wrong, but in your written testimony, you say that the median household income in Baltimore is $51,485. However, I just wanted to ask, did you know that the Maryland DHCD lists the median household income as $105,100, which I'm looking at on their website right now?
I believe that this was pushing, that the bill is asking people to look at the median in their jurisdiction. Well, if you're talking about people making $100,000, I don't know that you want to be subsidizing them.
Well, this is what's listed on the DHCD website for Baltimore City, 105,100. So 50% of that is $52,550, and by my calculations, 30% of that. So if somebody was paying 30% of their income in rent, that would be $1,575 per month, which is considerably more than what you list, $643 a month in your testimony. So does that value change when you say a landlord who receives $643 a month won't be able to maintain the property? Does the fact that the actual rent at the 50% median income is more than twice what you list?
But that's just not the case in the way this is fashioned. Baltimore City would have a number, Baltimore County would have a number, just as they have a different fair market rent number. This also doesn't apply if your rent is over 15% of the fair market value, which is also determined by jurisdiction area, by HUD. So my property is primarily in Baltimore City, and that's what my tenants would be, and that's where my tenants' rents are. My rents are in the $900 to $1,100 range, and the people who can afford 600 are going to have a hard time renting those, but they're very affordable. I mean, with below that, I can't pay the maintenance people, the utilities, the new roof, the new hot water heater, etc. So yes, if I lived in Montgomery County, I wouldn't be concerned because my rents would all be above this.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I'll have to look more closely at the bill, but it just seems like your numbers may not be correct. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we definitely need to dig underneath all that for sure. Delegate Terraza is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so are you disagreeing with DHCD's numbers then, Ms. Mock? I don't understand. Delegate Ruth just told
That's a state. Is that a statewide number?
That was the numbers. They just said DHCD. She just said DHCD's numbers for Baltimore City.
No, she didn't. She said the statewide number. I looked it up on the Baltimore City and County website.
She's
it
saying
was 51 and it was 70 something for the Baltimore County.
Okay, she's disagreeing with you. That is what she said. But okay, I guess I mean, maybe we do need to look back at the numbers, but I guess I'm finding some of this incomprehensible. And frankly offensive, this whole concept. I'm with Delegate Lehman after working 12 years on this issue on the county council, and then some years on this here. This whole idea of naturally occurring affordable housing makes little to no sense to me. It just it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it is to continue to talk about naturally occurring affordable housing. I mean, there's some housing is more expensive, some housing is less expensive, but to do that instead of, in the meantime, fight things like requirements for developers to build specific affordable housing units as a percentage of your development, to not support necessarily in addition to that. It has to be in addition. It can't be instead of required contributions to trust funds, and to keeping rents reasonable, which is this piece of it, thanks to Delegate Wells. It's just incomprehensible to me how we can then, I mean, if it were natural occurring, if affordable housing were naturally occurring, we wouldn't be in this crisis.
So make that into a question.
So yes, isn't that so? But I do have a question with that, and that is for Mr. Castelli. You were and I guess a couple of others have just talked about the supply and demand issue, and I think it's maybe an issue for this committee to talk more about. But I'd like it if you could share with us some of the studies that you've seen where just increasing supply leads to increased affordable housing, rather than just this sort of what I continue to hear, this sort of vague reference to, if we just increase the density, it's going to obviously lead to more affordable housing. Howard County is one of the fastest growing counties in the state, and we don't have nearly enough. I mean, we're nowhere close to enough affordable housing. And so even if it creates a few extra units that way, I would really hate for us to be heading in a direction where we think if we just increase the demand supply for of housing, we think somehow it's going to naturally occur. So do you have studies that you could share with us on that?
I don't have any specific studies talking about that. I mean, it's just generally, price, economics of supply and demand. And I would agree with you that a lot of the focus should be on creating more affordable units in the future.
Yeah. And I'm sorry to pick on you, because a bunch of folks said that. And so if there are others that have specific studies, that they could point to, because from my perspective, this bill is Delegate Wells trying to pick a piece of this issue and make a difference in it. And what I'm hearing is that the supply issue is really where we should be going. So I didn't mean to pick on you, Mr. Castelli. Are there others that know about studies that would say that that's the way to tackle this without keeping any control over the price whatsoever?
Yeah, Amy,
You're on mute.
Amy, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm sure there's something important you're saying, but I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. If you look at what comes online now, it's costing $250,000 to $300,000 a unit for what is being called affordable housing. What the naturally occurring determination, that is a nationwide term that is being used. It's not something we just made up. What it means is that the properties that my company built in the 60s and 70s, which I can afford to still maintain by getting a rent that's $900 a month instead of $2,500 a month if it was brand new, is because I don't have a mortgage anymore. That I developed it before the costs were as high as they were. But the cost of maintaining it does still eat up most of that rent. Because if you think of it, I've got a 600 unit apartment units over a 40-acre piece of land. The water and the sewer lines are all mine to maintain. I've got the same infrastructure problems
I hear
that
you,
the city
but
has.
do you have any studies that show that increasing supply?
Well, I think where we have to leave this question is that there are two different worldviews on this. Some people believe it exists. I'm one of the people who believe supply and demand is the only explanation for price. But there are others who don't agree with me.
Right. I'm just curious if there's research on that, because I hear it a lot as an answer to this problem. And I've seen studies to the contrary, but I'd like to see where the studies are that show.
I'm sure we can dig that. I'm sure we can dig that up.
Yeah.
I bet you could Google it.
I have.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been working this for a long time, and I'd like to see how that works, especially since once you have the property, if it's an investment property, you want to get your money out of it. And so once you stop having to pay a mortgage for it, doesn't mean you don't want to still get what the market will bear for it. So the market will bear a certain amount. So you charge what you can for it, not the minimum.
Okay. Well,
thank you.
Yeah, Marvin's got a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very briefly, does anyone on the call here have a copy of the Prince George's County Affordable Housing Task Force report that was done many years ago? I don't recall the final results. And if no one has a copy, may I ask our counsel, Mr. Chair, to find a copy of?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Sure. I have a question before I recognize Delegate Ruth. To any one of the opponents, my observation is that the reason we don't have enough affordable housing is because local community groups just won't allow us to build it. It's as simple as that. I mean, in Rockville, the building I'm living in, it has four levels of apartments rather than the originally planned 8. I believe that, I'm a person who believes that supply and demand determines the price of everything. And if local communities don't allow the building of affordable housing, I mean, Amy, you made some comment about the fact that these are buildings that were built in the 50s and 60s, back when you could actually build market rate affordable housing. Is it the case that that's now become sociologically and politically impossible?
Yes.
I was afraid.
I mean, the cost of building is much higher than the rents that you can get to supply. We have land that we never built on after 1978 because of the inflation that happened at that period, and the cost of building was just too high to make it make sense without having subsidies. So if you don't provide subsidies, you're not going to get new affordable housing.
Yep. Delegate Ruth, you're going to have the last question on this bill. And before you ask the question, people have probably noticed this bill has gone on longer than they ordinarily would, but I kind of took advantage of the sponsor of the bill in order to create a conversation, which is something I think our committee needs to have a little more of on this topic. So sorry, Delegate Wells, I hijacked your bill. Delegate Ruth has the last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for a second bite at the apple. Just while this discussion was going on, I looked up the language in the bill says occupied by a tenant that earns less than or equal to 50% of area media income is defined in section 4-1801 of the Housing and Community Development article. So I looked up 4-1801 and it says area media income means the median household income for the area adjusted for household sizes, published and annually updated by the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. And so I then looked up that number, and HUD lists the median family income for Baltimore, Columbia, Towson, that's area media income as defined in the bill, as $105,065. So to phrase this as a question, Ms. Mock, does that change your assessment? Can you provide us an updated assessment?
No, because I looked the same thing up, and if you go down to Baltimore, that same listing says 51. So that's where I brought it from. But even so, the rest of the state is much higher. But so that all that means that the bill also addresses whether the fair market value is, and we know that that is also from HUD, that is a Towson, Baltimore, Columbia number of $1,300, I think, per unit for a 2-bedroom apartment. And I mean, I have no problem. If I could get $1,300 for my 2-bedroom apartments, I would be very happy. And if I could get 4% a year increase, I would be okay with that. But this bill actually says I could get 4% a year increase for 1 year, and then only 1% a year increase after that. So it's just too tight. This bill is too tight for the costs that are going up right now, especially, you wouldn't have a reason to know this, but the supply side issues that they're talking about as far as appliances, you can't get refrigerators, hot water heaters, dishwashers, anything else like that is, one, hard to come by. 2, you have to get higher cost items because they're only putting chips in the high cost items. It's a very difficult time.
Thank you. Very quickly to Delegate Ruth's point, I have a very quick answer for you. Okay, so when you look at the AMI, that is true. That is the area median income. But when we're talking about HUD's income restrictions for housing, like their housing levels, 60%, 30%. If you Google this is 2021, but for Baltimore, Columbia, Towson, 60% limit, which is what they base assistance off, right? The 60% income limit, which would be considered low income for a family of 4, looks to be it looks to be 63,000. So that's for 60%. So I think that's where the disconnect is. When we talk about AMI with regard to HUD for housing, it is an adjusted level. And so that's where Amy was coming with her 50% and the $600.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Bradley, and I appreciate that. But in her, and Ms. Macht, I don't disagree that there are a lot of issues here that need to be worked through. But my question was just that your testimony says that median household income is $51,000, and then it takes that in half and says, so you're saying full median income is $51,000, when actually that $51,000 is closer to the 50% number. So I don't want to hijack this conversation anymore.
Any more than I already have.
I'll send you the pages that I copied from that report to get my numbers.
Okay, and that is literally the last word. I think it was a good discussion on this bill, but I'm a bit of a geek that way. So thank you very much, Delegate Wells, and all the proponents and opponents. We will now turn to a number of local bills that should move pretty swiftly. The first one is House Bill 396 of the Prince George's and Montgomery County delegations. It's a local bill being presented by Delegate Al Carr. Al, are you in the House?
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, for the record, Al Carr, thank you so much for letting me present House Bill 396. This is, as the chair said, it's a local bill, has to do with the Montgomery County Planning Board to require streaming and keeping of minutes, which codifies what they already do. It came out unanimously from both of the jurisdictions, and I ask for your favorable report.
All righty then. Any questions for the Vice Chairman of the Montgomery County delegation? Well, seeing none, you've come out unscathed on that one. How about House Bill 397?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Awesome colleagues of the ENT Committee. Delegate Al Carr here to present House Bill 397. This is a bi-county bill that simply updates the references in the code to reflect the fact that the voters of Montgomery County altered the charter to switch from a 9-member county council to an 11-member county council. This bill came out unanimously from both delegations, and I ask for your favorable report.
Terrific. Any questions for Delegate Carr? Okay, seeing none, we will zoom on over to House Bill 400. Al, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, colleagues of ENT. Delegate Al Carr here to present House Bill 400. This is a bi-county bill that has to do with WSSC, our water and sewer company, and it simply updates their code about hiring preferences for veterans and their spouses to match provisions in state law. And it came out unanimously from both delegations. I would ask for your favorable report.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Delegate Carr? Seeing none, that ends the public hearing for that bill. Let's move on to House Bill 4. Al, you're free to go, I think. Do you have any more? I don't think so. No, that's it. You're free to go. Next is House Bill 401, Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 401, that is the Prince George's County Reserve Study Bill, is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Thank you. The reason that this bill is in, ladies and gentlemen, is because all of you know that I have been providing legislation for reserve studies for multiple years now. Last year, Montgomery County instituted their reserve study.
What's this one?
That's Guy Andes.
Yeah. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
You already moved.
Last year, Montgomery County instituted their reserve study bill, and they added the word update to their bill every 5 years. And this bill that is before you right now simply adds the word that was adopted by Montgomery County to update the study every 5 years, thereby making it tremendously less expensive every 5 years to do a reserve study in Prince George's County, and makes it mirror what was adopted by Montgomery County last year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Before I ask if there are any questions, apparently I skipped over Guy Andes on House Bill 397. So after we get done with House Bill 400, if Guy is still in the room, I'll allow him to do his 2 minutes with my apologies. But in any case, any questions for Delegate Holmes for House Bill 401? Well, seeing none, that ends the public hearing on House Bill 401. Guy, are you in the room here? Oh, God, I offended him and he left, and now he's probably mad at me. All right. I'm going to end up having to buy him a beer or something. Okay. Let's move now to House Bill 537 is Delegate Ivey with us. And there he is, Julian Ivey. Welcome to the Environment and Transportation Committee, sir. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Always a pleasure. For the record, Delegate Julian Ivey presenting House Bill 537, Homeowners Extreme Weather Mitigation and Preparation Grant Program. For generations, really, flood mitigation has been a luxury out of reach for many Marylanders. This bill is a direct result of a lot of the damage that I've witnessed in and around the Port Towns communities within the 47th district. However, this grant program would be available for Marylanders across the state. We've worked with community leaders to locate programs to assist our constituents. And really, we've identified a major gap in funding, specifically for residents who don't have the ability to wait for a tax refund or reimbursement for expenses of this magnitude. And so therefore, we're proposing this grant program that would provide up to $5,000 to qualifying residents for either making repairs or retrofitting their property to make it less vulnerable to water damage. We've been working with stakeholders on this piece of legislation. We do have a few clarifying amendments that we'd like to offer. They're currently in drafting. The first would expand the type of properties eligible for the grant to include additional types of non-multifamily detached housing units, such as tiny homes or accessory dwelling units. The second clarifies the timing of acquiring sufficient levels of property insurance. Some homeowners have paid off their mortgage and are not required to hold insurance. We want to make sure that those individuals are also able to take advantage of this program. The third would amend the requirement to, quote, randomly inspect homes, unquote, to specify that the inspections would happen while the construction is in process. The bill also establishes a matching grant program for local governments and small nonprofit organizations up to $50,000. The legislation wouldn't go into effect until 2024. That is when our newly passed legislation and constitutional amendment would go into effect. But I am urging the governor to move this along more swiftly. Today, you'll hear from individuals who have, really been suffering in silence, and will be speaking on behalf of these communities, some even for generations. No one really wants to come forward and tell you about some of the issues that are caused due to water issues, but we're here to do just that. And I look forward to working with the committee to establish this program. And I ask for a favorable report on House Bill 537.
Okay, very well. Let's first turn to Petrella Robinson. Petrella, welcome to the Environment and Transportation Committee. You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. You know my phone is ringing. It always rings when you do something.
Isn't it?
My phone ringing and things like that, trying to stop. That's my home phone, okay? So I'm hoping it's gonna stop. It did stop. Good afternoon, Chair and delegates and committee members. My name is Mayor Petrella Robinson of the town of North Brentwood, Maryland. I am here to urge you to support HB 537 Extreme Mitigation and Preparation Grant Program. I was affected by the flood on September the 10th, 2020. I had water damage and I am in the 100-year floodplain. A majority of my citizens were affected, some major, some minor, but we all know that flood water is damaging whenever and wherever. This was an eye-opening event for us all. It affected many Prince Georgians and many different areas in the county. I have not seen flooding like this since I was a little girl. I was raised in North Brentwood in the same location, but this time I saw the flood waters rising and rising, and then I prayed. As mayor, I saw many of my residents impacted. One was a deaf couple who had also had flooding, but also had a sewer backup at the time. And I said, oh my gosh, I just said, what an impact. It was then that I implemented and brought to my council the Community Emergency Response Fund, using $30,000 of town funds to help our citizens during an emergency. It is to be used when the need is great and to help our citizens at a time when they cannot help themselves. Even having flood insurance means you have to have funds on hand to have your work completed. Money on hand is not readily available to all. We needed help at that time, but to no avail. FEMA and the county could not help us. We did not meet the guidelines, but we still had to find a way to repair, readjust, and reevaluate. The town of North Brentwood is in need of this program, and so are many other local governments too. A grant of this magnitude will help relieve citizens' worries and give us relief and hope when we need it most. North Brentwood is ready for the matching grant program. We can do this together. I urge you to support HB 537. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. And
please accept my apologies for not addressing you as Madam Mayor. I didn't realize you were the mayor, so
okay.
Forgive me.
Okay, no problem. Thank you
Okay.
so much for listening.
Okay, well, I love municipal government. Doug Bowles. Doug, are you in the house?
He is not here at the moment.
Okay.
I
Well,
am
Oh.
signed on.
Oh,
my
well, here we
apologies.
go.
I am signed on. My camera has started. Am I visible?
Yes, you're visible. We can even hear you. So lucky us.
Oh my goodness. The wonders of modern technology.
I
Isn't it
know.
something?
Well, welcome to the committee, and you've got 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you. I will keep it short. My name's Doug Bowles. I'm the Ward 3 councilman in the beautiful little village of Colmar Manor, which sits right next to the levee and the river of Anacostia. I can't say much more than the very eloquent and passionate mayor just spoke, but I will say the following, that our homes here are owned by moderate and lower income homeowners, and that we live in a town that is covered in significant part by the 100-year floodplain, and that many of these homes have been significantly affected by recent weather events, and that the citizens here need your help and need a bill like this. I want to speak out and just say that a proactive measure like this, where we are offering the opportunity for financial assistance to these folks before they have to go out of pocket, is just the kind of government outreach we need for now and for the future, as our environmental issues will no doubt become more acute as weather warms and as climate change continues to move us forward. We are at significant risk, as the mayor so eloquently said, and I want to thank Delegate Ivy for this visionary, environmentally sound and community-based legislation, and I stand in complete and utter support of it, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Questions? Well, we've got a couple of questions. The first one is Delegate Boyce, and you drive careful, sir. You drive careful.
Yes, please.
I am sitting in a parking lot.
Oh,
Praise the Lord.
okay. Okay. Boy.
That makes me feel better.
Yeah, me too. Okay, Delegate Boyce,
Thank
you're
you.
next.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Delegate Ivy, for bringing this bill, because this is something happening in my district. I have a street in Northeast Baltimore that has flooded for the last 60 years and has now just been having being rectified. But I had two questions. One, if I heard you correctly, you said one of the amendments is going to address potentially homeowners not having homeowners insurance because they've fulfilled the obligation of their mortgage, correct?
That's correct.
And can you help me through what that would look like? I'm a homeowner without home insurance, homeowners insurance, but my house is paid off. And as you know, I think most people don't know, homeowners insurance without additional insurance doesn't really cover certain items like in a flood or things like that. So would they be able to use this with, they would be able to use this supplementary to insurance to have things repaired or remediated or?
I believe that is correct. It's certainly the intent for individuals to be able to take advantage of this $5,000 grant if they do apply for it otherwise.
Okay. Okay. And the other question I had is, given the case that I know ourselves, we got money last year through the budget and working with the city. And I guess I just worry about costs to remediate, but worry about the issue of a reoccurrence. And so I guess how the two marry is this, they could get money paired with maybe local jurisdiction money to actually fix maybe what the issue is, or is it just securing the homeowner to help fight against or mitigate against the flood issues that may be happening on their property?
Well, Delegate, I can speak from experience. The house that I grew up in, Cheverly, it's at the very bottom of a very large hill. And the issue is that water's been flowing down for years. So they constructed a small wall to divert the water away from the home. Now, I don't know if that describes every situation, but the intent is to make this program accessible and to actually get to the issue at hand.
Wait, Delegate Ivy, you're telling me that your mom doesn't have the magical power to defy the law of gravity?
Oh my God, leave him alone.
Mr. Chairman,
You don't need.
I have not seen her defy gravity yet.
Sorry. Delegate Boyce, did I cut you off in the middle of a
No,
follow-up?
I was laughing. So I guess just to say, so they could use it for external remediation projects. Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, and it's really a great question. There's a provision in there that allows for municipalities to also apply. And so I know that in my town of Cheverly, the municipality is very hands-on about the water issues, and for them to be able to get matching funding from the state would be very helpful.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this bill. It's very important.
No, thank you.
Next question goes to Delegate Terraza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Delegate Ivy, for this bill. You said municipal, I'm just real quick on this last thing you said. That would be municipalities, but not counties, because I guess they already have access to other funds, or are you saying, or would they be eligible?
Grant program for local governments.
Okay, so that would include, they would be included?
It's something we will certainly hammer down, but it was my intent, at least for this, to really prioritize municipalities.
Okay, and then I share Delegate Boyce's, I don't know if it's a concern or it just raised a little question for me in my mind about the insurance piece. I guess I'll look at whatever amendment you're putting in, but that confused me a little bit. I don't know if you wanted to say some more about that, or maybe I just need to look at it.
No. And I think it's a perfectly fair question, because of course we want everyone to have a homeowner's insurance, flood insurance, et cetera. This was an issue that was brought forward by various stakeholders. The issue is we don't want to keep a homeowner who owns their home outright. They paid off their mortgage, but they have water issues. We don't want to keep them from being able to access this funding. So, but I am looking forward to getting down into the details on this, because it's important we get it right.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. And last question was, you said that you were expanding to more types of houses, and I noticed it said single family homes, and then you said something about tiny homes. What about townhomes and other types?
Yeah, townhomes and cottages and
like duplexes and stuff, or no?
Exactly. There are some smaller size condominiums as well. And so, the details very important specifically there. We were trying to find some of the specific description of some of these various places of dwelling. So,
okay. All right. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the bill.
All righty then. Next question goes to Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Delegate Ivy. Thank you for the bill.
And I'm having a teeny bit of trouble hearing you.
Okay, let me try again. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, well, I was able to hear you before, but it was a bit faint.
Okay, I've moved closer to my microphone.
Oh, that's so much better.
Okay. Delegate Ivy, thank you so much for the bill. I wanted to ask you if you had considered in all of this, and maybe you already have in the bill, I haven't looked closely, but there's a federal flood insurance that exists. And I know that, with rising sea levels, with all these crazy storms that we've had in Maryland and in recent years, maybe it's time for us to be looking at how do we access the federal insurance for our people. Is that part of your bill?
That specifically is not a part of this legislation. I think it is important for individuals to know about the various forms of relief that are out there. In the Ways and Means Committee, we work a lot on legislation dealing with the homeowner's property tax credit and making sure people are educated about these resources that are available. So I'd love to work with this committee on issues of that magnitude. But specifically, that's not the crux of this legislation.
Okay, I think that maybe that might be another way to get to the same goal. I'm just thinking out loud here. Thank you.
No, and Delegate Healy, there are resources that are available. Sometimes the issue is just that you have to pay for, whatever mitigation effort before you can get anything back from it. And there are just so many people, and
Oh, yeah.
who are just
No,
really.
I know. I've been through this myself. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Delegate.
Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Delegate Ivy, for bringing this bill. I have a question because it's not clear to me from looking at the bill, reading the bill. When you say nonprofit organizations in the bill, what are you contemplating there? What kind of nonprofit organizations?
Like the Boys and Girls Club, Chevrolet Young Actors Guild before they went defunct, community-based groups that are, having an impact in our communities. I could even rattle off their, domestic violence nonprofits, things of that nature. If they have a property that is experiencing water issues, that they would have access to this grant as well. And so I would like to make sure that there are safeguards in place. We don't want large organizations that are able to fund these repairs on their own. We don't want them taking advantage of this. But there's so many small nonprofits that could really use the help as well.
So this bill contemplates these grants to help do these mitigations on the properties owned by these nonprofit organizations.
Yes.
Okay, I see. Okay, thank you so much.
No, thank you, Delegate.
Any further questions for the sponsor or any of the advocates in favor of the bill? Nobody's opposed to the bill, so that's always good. So I think that ends the public hearing on House Bill 537. Thank you very much, Delegate Ivy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And let's go to House Bill 553, Delegate Arentz. Delegate, you've got, is Delegate Arentz?
Thank you, Chairman Barv. My name is Matt Moore. I'm the intern for Delegate Arentz, and I'll be presenting House Bill 553.
Okay.
Expert testimony.
You've got 4 minutes. Welcome to the committee.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Like I said, my name is Matt Moore. I'm the intern for Delegate Arentz, and I'm presenting House Bill 553 with the expert testimony of 2 expert witnesses. Delegate Arentz, who is not able to attend today's hearing for medical reasons. House Bill 553 clarifies insurance coverage for condominium regimes used for single-family detached properties. House Bill 553 will change Maryland's condominium law to require that this Council of Unit Owners only provide insurance for common elements for single-family detached units like under the Homeowners Association Act. Attached units would still need to meet the requirement to prove insurance covering both the unit and the common elements. Delegate Arentz is also offering amendment House Bill 553-873026-1 that provides a description of these common elements at the request of the Community Associations Institute of Maryland Legislative Action Committee. With that, I will now hand it over to Bill Castelli of Maryland Realtors or Kevin Waterville of Coldwell Banker Waterman Realty Company. Both are testifying in support. Thank you.
Okay, all right, then let's first go to Bill Castelli. Bill, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Bill Castelli on behalf of the Maryland Realtors in support of HB 553. And very quickly, we want to thank Delegate Arentz and his terrific intern for introducing the bill. The bill effectively tries to change insurance law regarding condos. In Queen Anne's County, as part of their workforce housing efforts, they've created a cottage home ordinance. And what that cottage home ordinance is it requires very kind of small units built on small lots that are single-family detached properties, so they look like a normal home would be in an HOA, but these are to be constructed under the condominium law. And there's some very key differences between condominiums and HOA when it comes to insurance. In fact, all of the condominium units, when they have their condominium fee, it will include a significant component of common area insurance. And in a condo situation, the common area is going to include hallways and walls and ceilings and other things that typically you wouldn't see charged for in terms of the HOA. But in the context of a condominium regime, which is single-family detached property, what ends up happening is an effort, for example, like in Queen Anne's, which was workforce housing, you end up having to charge a much higher fee to cover all of those common areas expenses. So what we would like to do is change the insurance law so that these homes that look like single-family homes actually operate like single-family homes for insurance purposes. So when someone's looking at an HOA provided home along with a home that's a single-family detached property in a condominium regime, they're going to be paying the same kinds of insurance rates, the same fees. Community fees are going to be very similar. And that's what this proposal is seeking to do, is create more transparency in these situations and make the consumer see these costs with the condo units on these affordable units much more like the costs that they see in other kinds of developments built under an HOA.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's next go to Kevin Waterman. Kevin, welcome to the committee. You've got 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to testify, and to Delegate Ahrens and in turn for the introduction of the bill. My name is Kevin Waterman. I am with Coldwell Banker Waterman Realty. We are a real estate brokerage and small local development company located in Queen Anne's County. We actually have done a project very similar to what the Cottage Cluster Ordinance allows for prior, and we have one that are currently taken through the development approvals process currently that would be under the new ordinance. And one of the things that we did discover when we were with that first community, Coles Crossing, was that almost every single person that came to look at one of those units misunderstood the nature of it, were very confused. Why is there this high condo fee? Because they looked at it and they saw a single family home and had a lot of trouble understanding that concept. Once we explained it to them, it wasn't that big of a problem. However, we have no way of knowing how many people whom a more affordable, smaller unit like this that would have been a great fit for never even came in the first place because they saw the high condo fee and were discouraged, thinking, I'm going to have a high condo fee and I'm going to have to pay insurance on top of that. The other big issue that we see, and this is why it's a benefit not just to consumers, but to the associations for cottage clusters themselves, is that cottage clusters are always small. In fact, the Queen Anne's County Ordinance, I believe, is no more than 10 or maybe 12 units at max. With a typical condominium with dozens to hundreds or even close to 1,000 units, if several units don't pay, that's not a big cost to disperse over the other units. If you've got that few units, it's a massive cost that gets shifted to the other owners. And if they can't do it, then you could potentially find the community in a death spiral that ultimately leads to it being completely uninsured, which is obviously an untenable situation for all of the residents there. Also, I think worth noting is we do have a letter that we have received, Delegate Ahrens received. Unfortunately, it came in too late to be submitted for you all for today from the planning director for Queen Anne's County, just noting the nature of the ordinance, that there's no conflict that this bill would create with our existing ordinance in Queen Anne's County. And I just, this would be a very positive thing for consumers, for cottage clusters themselves. And I don't think it causes any danger or problem for the condo industry. Obviously, I fully support the amendment that was done at the request of the Community Association Institute. Thank you.
Okay, great. We have a couple of questions a couple of delegates who have questions. Before I let you go, is that an Old Bay bow tie?
Yes, it is.
Thought so. First question goes to Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Got to have a couple of questions. The cottage cluster provision, is that just within Queen Anne County, or are there other cluster provisions within the state?
So I am only familiar with the Queen Anne's ordinance, although it is not uncommon for cottage cluster ordinances to be organized under a condominium regime nationally. And I don't know, Kevin, are you familiar with other local ordinances?
I am not sure if there are any other locally. We do most of our work in Queen Anne, so that's where our familiarity is.
Okay, because this is a statewide bill, correct? Okay. The other thing is the condominium regime for a small standalone building. What you're doing, it sounds like, is you're reassigning the insurance responsibility of the exterior of that standalone building to the condominium as a common element. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, in fact, what it would do would be to create under the condo law a different class of condominium. So in the case that you just cited, Delegate Holmes, where you had a multi-unit building where you had hallways and common areas and probably, they all share the same roof, possibly the same floor, then in that case, it would just be the normal condo insurance policy where those common element insurance would cover, in fact, the roofs, the walls, everything else. Only in the context of a single family detached condominium unit would this different insurance apply. So we would apply kind of the HOA insurance rules to the single family detached condo.
So taking the typical and normal condominium concept of the roof and the exterior of the building, what you're telling me, Bill, is that it does not apply to these cottage clusters in terms of the insurance requirements that we're putting forward in this bill. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it would operate much like in the context of that single family detached, it would operate much like the HOA insurance does. Those owners would be responsible for that insurance covering those elements. And the benefit to that is that, if you end up having a situation in these developments where you have very few numbers, if you had someone experiencing problems, not being able to pay, that cost doesn't get spread around to, 8 other owners who are trying to make up for those costs under the condo fee.
And I've just one final question, Mr. Chair. In each of the cottages, which are which look like a single family unit, there's only one ownership per cottage. Is that correct?
Yes, I presume you might, potentially could have a situation where I imagine perhaps if a divorced couple, they might end up with, they have joint ownership, but in general, the standard would be the same as with a detached single family home outside of a condominium.
Yeah, and that's what I meant. Units of the entirety, that kind of thing would be the same. So in the context that I'm looking at is the ownership would be ownership of the cottage. One cottage would be the same as the ownership type of a single family home. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Delegate Wyville has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm not totally clear on, I understand the concept of the cottage cluster and all that, but the language in the fiscal note says it specifies that mandatory property insurance for condos is required by existing provisions, must generally cover the common elements and the units for attached or multifamily dwelling. So I know currently if it's a common element, it's covered by the HOA, and if it's the unit itself, it's covered by the owner. The language just seems confusing to me. Could you clarify that again?
Yeah, if you would, for example, let's take the context of the HOA. You will pay as part of that HOA fee insurance costs that they might have for common elements within the HOA. The difference is that in the HOA, those common elements are going to be potentially a park area, might be a right-of-way, utility right-of-way, might be a road, might be a community facility of some kind. Whereas in the condo situation, that those common elements are going to extend way beyond just those different kinds of community facilities to the actual structures themselves, including the walls of the units and everything else. So what we're trying to do is say, in the context of these condominiums that are built as standalone single-family detached properties, the insurance would operate like the HOA, so that instead of having a common element policy that covers not just a community facility, although many of these cottage homes don't have that, but that condo fee isn't going to cover insurance for the roofs, the wall, and the other things that these owners do not share with any other owner. I mean, the difference.
So who's being required to carry the insurance? The HOA?
So HOA would be required to carry insurance for the condo, and then the owners would be required to carry the insurance for the unit, their dwelling.
All right, well, that's not the way I read the fiscal note. We can talk about it in subcommittee. Thanks.
Okay, there appear to be no further questions. There are no. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. 1 second bite at the apple, please. Mr. Waterman or Mr. Castelli, could you please provide me with a contact for a carrier that will be providing this specific type of insurance that you're looking for, so that I might have a conversation with them as well?
We'll be happy to try and find that information for you.
Thanks so much.
Okay, now I think there are no further questions and there are no opponents. So that ends the public hearing on House Bill 553. Mr. Moore, you did a great job presenting the bill for your boss. And with that, we will turn to House Bill 608, Delegate Jalisi. And you've got 4 minutes, Jay.
Thank you, Chairman Barway and my fellow committee members. For the record, this is Delegate Jay Jalisi. My bill HB 608 deals with the Shelter and Transitional Housing Facilities Grant Program within the Department of DHCD, and it provides capital financing for local governments and nonprofit organizations to develop shelter, transitional, or other housing facilities for homeless individuals and families. This grant program was initially created by the passage of my bill HB 1476 in 2016. It enables projects including apartments, condominiums, townhouses, single-family homes. The basic requirement to qualify is that they should be limited to homeless individuals for at least 15 years. Any housing units financed with the capital assistance will be occupied by homeless households for at least 15 years. Now, as we know, COVID-19 has created a lot of financial hardship for Marylanders, and while we have made significant efforts to stem the tide of mass evictions or foreclosures, homelessness still remains a major issue, which has not received in my view, the attention it deserves. So my bill HB 1476 in 2016 that I mentioned before created for the first time a $3 million funding in the Maryland budget, but even at that time it was insufficient. And a lot of needs still exists. Therefore, I request in this bill an additional $2 million be allocated in the Maryland budget to supplement the existing funding, which has been in our budget since 2018. If approved, if the bill is approved, it would not go into effect till 2024. And it would mean that they would be included in the annual budget or the capital budget. Total of $5 million for shelter and transitional housing grant programs, which nonprofits, local governments, or churches may use to supplement their expenses for providing services to the homeless families. And I request a favorable response from the committee. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Nobody else is. We have positive written testimony, but nobody else has signed up to testify. Any questions for Delegate Jalisi? I have a question. This has a $2 million fiscal note, and you're saying, did you say that the money is in the budget, or what I didn't quite understand.
So my bill HB 1476, which passed the House and the Senate in 2016, puts $3 million every year. Even at that time, the need was $9 million that was requested by the.
So does this increase it?
So it increases by $2 million. We are still only halfway to what the need was in 2016. But that money that the state puts out in its budget gets used up pretty quickly. And homelessness is not an issue that's going away. So we need to do more. And that's what I think.
Okay. Any further, Delegate Boyce has a question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Delegate Jalisi, for such an important bill. A question that I have, and it may be a personal pet peeve, but transitional housing, I think, is important. Housing is important. Can we talk about the bill as it relates to talking about shelters? I personally believe that it's not shelters that we need more of. We could be using that money to have more housing or transitional spaces versus shelters, unless you define a shelter as a transitional space.
In my opinion and my experience that I've worked with different shelters by and large are 90-day shelters that I know of and that I have worked or operated. After 90 days, the person is supposed to move into some sort of a more permanent accommodation. And so I would consider the shelters that I know as transitional housing facilities, even if they are called homeless shelters.
Understood.
So that's what my understanding is in this bill.
And so could you speak to also the fact that especially those who are chronically homeless tend not to want to be in shelters because they are found to be, in most cases, in certain ones, unless they're very small shelters that, cater to very small amounts of individuals. They're places that homeless individuals, especially chronically homeless individuals, do not trust and therefore do not use.
So I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
So yes, I'm sorry. So I just want you to speak to the fact that usually chronically homeless individuals are those who tend to be literally on the streets and need immediate housing, tend not to use shelters because they do not trust shelters, or their shelters are not safe in some regard. And I just want you to speak to that notion about as it relates to, again, providing money for shelters versus financing more transitional housing or more affordable housing.
So since the bill says that the money is not given directly, but it goes through local governments or nonprofits who are already operating this type of housing facilities. So I agree with you, actually. And I think that the big difference, as I see as a physician also, is the shelters, just the pure shelters, do not provide facilities, for example, medical facilities. A lot of people who we find on the street are a byproduct of when we closed down hospitals who provided mental health services in Maryland many years ago. So yes, I think that not just providing a roof over somebody's head, but also providing them the tools to become a productive member of the society is very important.
Yeah.
And I think that's the service that the transitional housing facilities provide. And I thank you for bringing up this issue.
Yeah, and then my final question is that, so local governments could potentially use these monies to enhance their shelters to do exactly what you're talking about, maybe provide some intermediary resources until folks are permanently housed.
That's right. So in Baltimore County, we have two shelters, one for in my district, and one for females and families, and then there's one in a neighboring district for men. And yes, they could potentially use this money. It's operated by, both of them are operated by two different nonprofit organizations, but both of them provide medical health services and also training services for finding jobs. And I think that they could both use this money.
Thank you so much. Great bill.
Thank you.
Next question goes to Delegate Wyval.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate, I'm just looking at the Maryland Department of Budget and Management's information bulletin, and they also had the same comments in regard to House Bill 537, that with the changes in the Maryland Constitution in 2020 and the legislature's new budgetary power, they're saying that these type of mandated spending bills basically diminish, if not negate, the need for such type bills. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think that question came up even in 2016 when we didn't have the billions of dollars in surplus that we have today. And even then, the Assembly approved $3 million of a $9 million request. The point is, we put aside money for everything in our budget except for this one particular issue. But whenever I drive in my district, outside my district, go from here to anywhere, I find people who could benefit from special funding, who could benefit from medical treatment, shelter, housing, and I think we should make it easier. This is better than offering tax credits for low income. In a way, because you reach people who are directly affected and not just the individuals, but their families. So yeah, $2 million is a big fiscal note, but I think that could be offset by the benefit it creates in the community by not having people, at least so many people out on the street and sleeping under the bridges.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the sponsor of the bill? Well, seeing none, thank you very much, Delegate Jalisi. That ends the public hearing on House Bill 608. Let's proceed to House Bill 615. Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can.
Thank you very much. House Bill 615 and House Bill 616 are reintroductions. They're basically the same concept. The one is the 615 relates to condos and homeowners associations dispute resolution system. This is a reintroduction. It passed the House unanimously last year and got hung up in the Senate. And it actually has been reintroduced several times. So I think that the committee may be familiar with it. The other bill is the co-op, because it's written in a different part of the law. It's not real estate, it's business, but it's basically the same kind of thing. And so there are variations on a theme. And I have here, a CAI has a representative who will be able to answer questions.
Well, we can take both bills simultaneously. Was that other bill passed also, right?
Yes, they both in the same way.
So, I'm
sorry, there is one technical amendment on the other bill, which is a truly technical bill. It was a drafting error.
Okay. Well, okay. So Kathleen Elmore is here with CAI. Kathleen, you've got 2 minutes, or are you just here to answer questions?
I mean, I can answer questions. That's fine. I believe, y'all are familiar with the bills. As Delegate Healy has said, they're basically the same bills that have been introduced. We actually tweaked them a little bit to give homeowners a little bit more time, so that we changed it from 10 days notice of a violation you have to give them, that's a minimum, to 15. And primarily, quite frankly, that's because of the mail system. It's a little slower now, so we wanted to make sure that they had the proper notice, so that was changed. But other than that, it's just basically the same bills. If you have questions, any differences between a co-op and condominiums and homeowners associations and why they're slightly different, I can answer that.
Yeah, Marvin, would you like to know the answer to that? Just joking. Any questions for the sponsor or Kathleen Elmore? Well, seeing none, Anne, you've gotten out unscathed on both bills. So yay for you. Okay. No questions. Okay. Believe it or not, people, that's the end of the public hearing, and it's 5 minutes after 3. Yippee for us. So announcements.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
the Ag Subcommittee will meet at 3:15.
Okay. Any other announcements?
The Housing and Real Property Subcommittee will meet tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Recognize that that's a little bit different time than normal. Housing and Real Property at 11 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Dana?
The Environment Subcommittee will meet tomorrow after bill hearings.
Okay. Anyone else have any other subcommittee chairs have any announcements?
Thursday after bill hearings.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else, Ann?
Yeah, I have also Thursday after bill hearings, one bill, very quick,
Okay.
local government.
Okay. Brooke, are you on or? Okay. Well, anybody else have an announcement for the good of the order?
Mr. Chairman, I got a question.
Yes, Jay.
I didn't quite hear what Delegate Gilchrist said about the Natural Resources Subcommittee time.
3:15.
3:15?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments or expletives for the good of the group? If not, have a nice afternoon, folks. Behave yourselves. Bye.